This is the Mooncast.
See you, Space Cowboy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. So, we're going to be talking about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and this is like a policy framework, right? So, just continuing back on from what we were talking about in the first part, and just piggyback offing that. And as you can see here, the strategic Bitcoin reserve would be a government held stockpile of Bitcoin designed to diversify national asset holdings, mitigate potential economic and national security risk, and signal that the United States is at the forefront of financial innovation in a digital age. Yes, I mean, having a strategic Bitcoin reserve would do that. I mean, they technically already do because they do own 200,000 Bitcoin that they basically got from a hack. Forgot which hack it was, but that's why they have so much Bitcoin. They didn't really buy that Bitcoin. They're just keeping that Bitcoin for now. Now, moving on, let's just look here and see the why does the U.S. government have national reserves, right? So national reserves are an essential component of a broader strategy to ensure U.S. economic stability, national security, and preparedness in times of crisis. Reserves send market and geopolitical signals that detour or mitigate destabilizing strategic conditions. And whether they consist of physical commodities, financial assets, or critical supplies, they serve a variety of important policy purposes, right? So, of course, it's very important as a country to have a stockpile of reserves of a multitude of different assets because that allows you to prepare for times of economic turmoil and crises, right? That is very important because if you're not prepared and situations occur, you then become interdependent or reliant on other countries to be able to sustain your country, right? And that's a situation you don't want to be in as a country. So the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve would just add on to that stockpile of national reserve assets that allows then the US to be more protective of itself in the case of them defaulting on their debt, which they will, right? This is inevitable. They're going to have to default on their debt or just hyperinflate and overly tax citizens to death until there's some kind of revolution, right? Either way, it's not going to end well, and it's a ticking time bomb. So the Bitcoin strategic reserve would be that hedge in case or when the fiat system fails, and they would have something else to fall back on as a unit of account to be able to trade for goods and services and etc. So yeah, that's basically what this is discussing, and that's basically the entire breakdown of what that entire paragraph was about. Okay, so moving forward, let's scroll here and look at the emergency preparedness, right? So reserves play a vital role in national emergency preparedness. Okay, so yeah, we already talked about this. Let's move over here to geopolitical leverage. So the accumulation of valuable assets like precious metals or foreign currencies enables the U.S. to influence international markets and maintain its strategic position on the global stage. It it won't be able to. So the the dollar is decreasing in dominance every single year, right? It's not increasing. And the percentage of the amount of market share that it has is only going to decrease over the course of time as people look for alternatives because they've already kind of shown the world that they are not trusted, right? With all of these sanctions and etc. that they keep enforcing and imposing on people, so that they basically don't have the sovereignty over their country to do whatever they want because it's this sort of weird pseudo imperialism, or if you, however you want to call it, neo imperialism regime, right? So these countries actually aren't sovereign because they have to participate in a global system that is owned in or rather controlled by the United States, and they're subject to what the U.S. says. And if you don't listen to what the U.S. says, then they'll first try to financially cripple you, and if they can't get that done, then they'll try to come in with soldiers, right, to destabilize your economy. If they can't do it with soldiers, they'll do it with terrorist groups. If they can't do it with terrorist groups, they'll try to assassinate the leader, right? They'll pay somebody that's a disgruntled sort of citizen within your ecosystem, and then they'll go ahead and they'll pay that people or group of peoples to go ahead and assassinate that leader that is not listening to what they want and is not serving their interest, right? So that's just kind of how it works currently, right? Now, if you're unable to continue to control the monetary system, then that puts you at risk in a sense of you won't have global dominance or influence over others, which means that others won't have to listen to what you have to say, which means that they would then be able to dictate their own futures and their own growth. The reality is, majority of these Western countries in general, it's not just the United States, majority of these countries in general in the West can't compete in a free and fair market, right? When the market is free and fair, they lose. If you look back before, pre-colonialism, and you look back at how the societies were running, they were running really smoothly and accelerating in growth. So what they did was impede and stop growth by coming in and being barbaric and violent and etc. And when I say they, I'm talking about the Europeans in general, right? And they basically destroyed or stagnated or stopped growth, right, from happening, and stole intellectual property, stole creativity, stole humans, to help prop up their societies, and that's why we have the world that we have today. So a lot of these countries, if left to their own, i.e., China, you see how fast they're able to accelerate and surpass the U.S. This is why the U.S. is so scared of China, because the Chinese are they literally told the U.S. to go there, and or not, they struck a deal with the U.S. to be able to help them with learning their ways, right? And once they learned their ways, and they were able to replicate it and accelerate it, and now they've surpassed the US, right? I don't even know if those GDP numbers are correct. I think China, in my opinion, has already surpassed the US in economic productivity. I mean, what does the US really produce? They don't manufacture most of their stuff. They export inflation and war. Those are like the two main exports currently right now, and propaganda, right? Those are probably the three main exports they do. So my point is, when left to their own devices as a country without external influence, you see an acceleration of growth. It happens every single time. um, so they have to then come in with their outside influence to stop and impede progress so that they can be able to catch up or to stay ahead of these other countries, right? And that's basically how the entire system works. So the Bitcoin strategic reserve, if we are going to switch into a new monetary system, would give them a strategic advantage, because if they're able to target that 1 million Bitcoin, is what the plan is to do within that next 5 years, then that would position them as global leaders in regards to Bitcoin reserve, and the amount that they have. But again, it comes back down to how much money do they have to be able to afford the Bitcoin, right? Because if they're going to be dollar cost averaging in for 5 years, then that means that they would need to get the money from somewhere. And where can they get the money from? Because as I previously stated in part one of this, we're at a stage where they're paying back debt with debt, right? So they're borrowing money to pay back the old interest payments, not even the principal, and that principals continue to increase, which means that the interest rate payments are increasing and the economic productivity is slowing down and decreasing. And a lot of the jobs that were available are getting replaced by artificial intelligence and soon robotics. So, how are they going to get the tax dollars to subsidize this? Or are they just going to print their own currency to buy the Bitcoin, which is something that I alluded to that would eventually happen with a lot of countries, is that they would print their own currency to buy Bitcoin. And I think that's how we would accelerate to get into a Bitcoin global standard. And, I don't know how that would look like, because the entire idea was for Bitcoin to be more evenly distributed and not to have it unevenly distributed. But at the same time, if there's a fixed supply asset that everyone's going off of in terms of metrics, then that means that, and it's a global asset or global standard and it's fixed, then people still need goods and services. So if they're going to be trading with that for the foreseeable future, then that means that prices would have to start coming down, because the monetary policy that would be adopted in Bitcoin was scarce, right? So the goods and services would have to come down because you can't print more of it to compete for those goods and services. So, but you can always make more goods and services within the same niche. So that would make it mean that there'd be less money to go around, which means the prices would have to come down because they need to become more competitive, right? So as we scroll down here, they talk about promoting domestic industries, right? So another key function of national reserves is to support industries that contribute to critical economic interest and important political constituencies, right? So, for example, the US government maintains programs to help farmers through periods of crop failure or fluctuating commodity prices. This includes stockpiling agricultural products and the strategic release of reserves to stabilize prices and ensure that farmers can continue to operate in difficult market conditions. So basically what he's alluding to is to stockpile those reserves. And so in the case of economic turmoil, you can then deploy some of those reserves to subsidize and help out the market essentials, which is food, water, energy, these sort of leading market essentials that you need to sustain and continue running a country, right? So this talk about historical reasons, right? And it says the U.S. government practice of maintaining national reserves has deep historical roots dating back to the Bretton Woods Agreement and country's rise as a global superpower. So if you guys don't know, the Bretton Woods Agreement happened in 1944, where it basically allowed the US to become the strategic global reserve asset, right? And then this is when, around that time, they went partially off the gold standard and then eventually went completely off the gold standard in 1970, right? So when the US became that baseline for international trade, so like even now today, if like I'm in, let's say, Nigeria, I want to send money to Kenya, I can't just send money usually directly to Kenya. In the back end, what's happening typically is the Nigerian naira then gets swapped into US dollars. So that money gets sent to New York and swapped into US dollars and recorded there. And then after that, then the money goes into Kenya and swapped back into Kenyan shillings, right? In this example. And that's typically how the money logistics works. So it gives the US a strategic advantage. Also, like you're kind of forced to have more demand of dollars, right? Because it's just easier for international trade. And also they get to know, they have in transit visibility of the majority of global trade, right? Which basically allows them to monitor what's happening, which is, no one should have that much power, right, over the monetary system. So excuse me. So when you look at the strategic objectives for Bitcoin reserves, Here you see that in the context of the U.S. government's already substantial asset holdings, which again include land, oil, and gold, expanding the portfolio to include Bitcoin could serve multiple strategic objectives that align with both economic and geopolitical imperatives. So they've already talked about that. The S&P 500 gold and Bitcoin through major geopolitical events. So you can see here the performance rates of how they've done. Here's a 10-day return versus a 60-day return, it looks like. So you can see Bitcoin during the Iran escalation, Bitcoin has outperformed in that 10-day and also outperformed in a 60-day. The COVID outbreak, Bitcoin didn't outperform in a 10-day, but if you look at the 60-day, it outperformed the S&P and gold. And if you look at the 2020 US election challenges they had, it outperformed in 10-day and in the 60-day. And if you look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is where Bitcoin didn't do so well, but it did do really well with the US regional banking crisis that happened in 2023. So it pumped 25% here, and you can see on the 60-day it did a 32% move compared to gold. On the 60-day they did 11% move, and the S&P 500 did a 4% move, right? So yeah, overall we can see that Bitcoin typically ends up outperforming, right? Which is obvious, right? It's the best performing asset class in the last 15 years. Nothing has been able to compete with it at all. And here you can see it says the US government has long held a diverse array of strategic assets. So we already talked about that. So just scroll through along here. Don't want to keep repeating ourselves, beating onto a dead horse. So it talks about enhancing financial system credibility. So it says here that integrating Bitcoin into the US national reserves could significantly bolster the credibility of the country's financial system in an increasingly uncertain global economic environment. So my thesis has always been that we're going into a multipolar technocentric future. Irrespective of what happens, if the US adopts some Bitcoin as strategic reserve or they don't, we're still going into a multipolar technocentric future. That's my thesis, right? We're talking about all the different products that are going to be launching from different subcategories and sectors within the tech space, like robotics, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, Web3 technology, and so on and so forth, right? So that's where we're going, and things are going to be a lot different. So you need to be preparing for that shift, and also you need to be preparing for the US not being the dominant force. I think we'll have different regions, and in these different regions that we currently have in society today, you have dominant forces in each region. Like in Africa, it probably will be the Sahel states, right? It's looking like they're on that trajectory to be that. In, let's say, North America, it'll probably be the United States still, right? In that region. In South America, it would probably be maybe El Salvador could help to lead the charge in South America, maybe, perhaps. I'm just being very optimistic because they did adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. They are trying to drive a lot of investment into their country, and which also brings a lot of skilled labor into their country. So they could be maybe positioning themselves in the future. I'm talking about not in the next, like, near future, like 5 years. I'm talking more like 15, 20 years from now. There's Argentina, maybe could be on that track. We'll see what happens with South America, who will be that regional dominant power there. When you look at Asia, it's obviously going to be Russia and China, right? As those main players. Maybe India too as well, you can throw in there as those major players. And I just think that that's how it's going to be moving forward.
Imagine 10xing your earnings capacity to 100K per year while working remotely at the comfort of your own home. We are in the exponential growth phase of technological advancements. That means AI, AR, VR, robotics, and of course, Web3 technologies taking over the job market. At Helicode Academy, we train students on Web3 hard skills and link them to employment in the job market. Find out more at helicode.xyz. And as always, see you, Space Cowboy.
So yeah, that's how you got to be looking at the world now. The world is going to reposition itself as the old regimes and facets are dying down, and imperialism as a subsequent effect will die down. Neo-colonialism will die down, which will allow these countries to finally accelerate, right? And yeah, so let's scroll down here. This article it's repeating itself a lot, so I don't want to reread a lot of the things we've already reiterated or we've already talked about. So you can see here, building long-term economic resilience, right? One of the most compelling arguments for the strategic Bitcoin reserve is its potential to build a long-term economic resilience. It's obvious, right? It's obvious. So if you're able to save in a asset that's always appreciating against the dollar depreciation over the course of time, then it's a hedge, right, against your own monetary policy that's broken. So here you can see BlackRock found that the Bitcoin is a unique portfolio diversifier as more volatile version of gold. So yeah, you can see here in this chart, this is a trailing 6-month chart that compares the correlation between Bitcoin and gold from 2015 to 2024. So it says, as the U.S. debt continues to rise, concerns about inflation and the sustainability of fiscal policy are becoming more pronounced. Given that supply of Bitcoin is fixed, greater adoption will translate to higher prices. Increases in the value of Bitcoin might benefit the U.S., given that the government debt arguably is on an unsustainable trajectory. Obviously, right? Obviously. So implementation considerations. So the management and oversight of the strategic Bitcoin reserve would require a carefully designed government structure to ensure its effective operation in alignment with national interest, right? The Department of Treasury should be responsible for holding and managing the SBR, distinct from Federal Reserve operations. Now, I believe Elon Musk is in one of these governmental bodies. Now, I haven't been tracking it so hard. I know that they released some organization called Doge, and I forgot what it actually the acronym stands for. But the entire idea is to help to regulate, Bitcoin and the entire crypto market, right? So that's basically the entire idea. And I'm just trying to Google here and see if I can find. Yeah, so it's the Department of Government Efficiency, right? And so I'm wondering what. Let me see if I can find it here on the internet. I'm just looking here just to see what I can find, if I can find any information. So anyways, I can't find what I'm looking for currently right now, but from my understanding, that entire organization is designed to help with allowing the government to be more efficient and also the regulations to be better and etc. So we'll see how that works in the long term. I need to look more into it to get more details on it because I'm so busy with so many different tasks, and the multiple projects that I'm running. I haven't had time, but what I would say is that they are looking to effectively change a lot of the current status quo with these new regime replacements. Gary Gensler is no longer part of the SEC, right? So they have a change of hands, a change of guard, if you will, and new leadership there. So I'm very curious to see how that works for Bitcoin and the crypto market, which are two separate things. This is focusing on Bitcoin, which is a decentralized, self-sovereign distributed ledger operating system, whereas crypto is companies leveraging blockchain technology to enhance or optimize goods and services, right? So open market purchases. This method would allow for gradual accumulation without causing dramatic market disruptions. The government could set up a systematic buying program, potentially using dollar cost averaging, which is again what we talked about already, to mitigate the impact of Bitcoin's price volatility. This approach would also signal the government's long-term commitment. So if we have constant buying pressure, imagine this: constant buying pressure from the United States for the next 5 years. That's guaranteed buying pressure for the next 5 years. That's going to be huge for the entire Bitcoin market, right? But again, it's a trade-off because now the US would own, you know, what, close to 5% or so of the entire supply, which, yeah, I mean, take with that what you will. So they talk about Bitcoin seized assets here. Incorporating Bitcoin seized assets from criminal investigations provides a cost-effective means of building the reserve. Right. So, yeah, we've already talked about that. The U.S. could consider engaging in Bitcoin mining operations. Yeah, interesting stuff here. Okay, moving on. A multi-layered approach could include hardware wallets. Yeah, we got it. So it says here implementing the SBR, or the Bitcoin Reserve, the strategic reserve, right, would require the development of a comprehensive legal and regulatory framework. Obviously, right? Obviously, guys. So the size and accumulation strategy. This could be interesting. Let's see here. The size of the SBR should be substantial enough to serve its strategic purposes, but not so large so that as to dominate the market or create systemic risks such as loss of confidence in the US dollar. And this is again that balancing act that you have to do, because majority of the people in the States still think that there's people in the States that still think that money is backed by gold. There's people actually globally, when I talk to people globally, they still think money is backed by gold, which is absolutely insane. In 2025, people still think that money is backed by gold. And if they don't think it's backed by gold, they just think like, yeah, well, it's backed by the US government and the military. And I'm like, yeah, but well, what gives them so much authority, right? We can take our sovereignty back as people. So when the US starts buying more Bitcoin reserves and people start noticing that, maybe some people be like, well, is there an issue with the monetary system that we have currently? Why are they getting into Bitcoin? Isn't Bitcoin like a startup to challenge the current monetary system? Isn't that why it was designed? So if they're getting into it, then that probably means that the current system or current model is failing. If that current model is failing, then why should I be holding dollars? And if I'm not supposed to be holding dollars, then I'm supposed to be probably holding the thing that they're buying, which then would make it so that you would see an influx of dollars getting pumped into Bitcoin, right? Which would then decrease the strength and confidence in the dollar as a whole, which would then subsequently make Bitcoin eventually a strategic reserve asset, not just for the US, but globally, and also a global asset for international trade, which it already is. People are trading with it, but it's just not talked about, it's not spoken about, and not as many people are doing that currently because they don't know too much about the asset, right? So integrating with existing financial systems. One key consideration would be how Bitcoin holdings are accounted for on the national balance sheet. All right. This could involve developing new accounting standards or adapting existing ones to accommodate the unique characteristics of cryptocurrency assets. The volatility of Bitcoin's price would need to be addressed in financial reporting and risk management practices. All right, all right, all right, all right. It says here, while this SBR would be managed by the Treasury rather than the Federal Reserve, its existence could have implications for monetary policy decisions. For instance, large scale Bitcoin holdings could affect the government's overall risk profile and potentially influence decisions on interest rates or quantitative easing. For example, Treasury purchases of Bitcoin on the open market using, for example, dollar funds credited to the Treasury general account by having the Federal Reserve market to market undervalued gold certificates could lead to an increase in circulating bank reserves, causing second order effects on the money supply and credit conditions. That is, reserves in the Treasury general account become dollars in the accounts of the private sellers of Bitcoin and enter the money supply. Very interesting. Huh. The existence of the US Bitcoin reserve could impact currency markets and international trade relations. Mechanisms for using the SBR in international financial operations, such as balance of payments adjustments or emergency liquidity provision to allies, would need to be developed. Okay, so let's move on to the objections and replies. So an SBR would expose the US government to vulnerability by triggering a loss of confidence in sustainability of the dollar system, right? Which is obvious, right? I've already broken that down. So this objection assumes that adding Bitcoin to the US national reserves would undermine the dollar's credibility and stability. However, Bitcoin is simply another form of reserve asset, much like gold. Sure. I mean, that's one way you could look at it. Depends, you never know how the market is going to react, how the people are going to react. That's an unpredictable unit of measurement, right? You don't know, right? We don't know. They could react in that way, saying, oh, the dollar's losing confidence, you need to get out of the dollar, which the dollar is losing dominance, and the dollar is losing, or people are losing confidence within the dollar. It's very important to not have so many dollars, I think, in your bank currently today. It's very risky. If you look at what's happening in the UK now, they're looking to propose a tax on people that have more than £10,000 saved. Yes. And that's because of them waking up to their reality that they are absolutely broke, like majority of the West is, in this current monetary system that they've created for themselves. They are now broke within it. And it's very hard for a lot of people to come to that conclusion. And my thesis is that when the money is broken and the people are broken and also broke, everyone is going to start running towards, or starting to realize they need to run towards, raw materials, natural resources, and scarce commodities, right? And Bitcoin is the scarcest commodity on the planet, right? And also majority of the natural resources and irritable lands and fertile lands are in Africa. So I don't know if you guys are noticing, but billionaires and millionaires are buying up large chunks of land in Africa, right? So that kind of tells you where things are headed, and you definitely want to stay ahead of the curve by not having so much dollars, because again, these are fictitious imaginary digits on a screen created by a man, right? A man created these systems, right? And it only works as long as people believe in it. Once people stop believing in it, then it doesn't work. Well, what do you have to fall back on? Do you have land? Can you farm and feed yourself? Do you have any sort of self-sustainability? What happens if they take you off of the grid in terms of electricity? Do you have solar panels? Do you have a generator? What happens if you need water? Do you have access to clean drinking water? These are the types of things you should be thinking about, and not just what they put in your face that you need to get more and more money, right? Okay, moving on to another objection is that SBR would enrich cyber criminals, terrorists, and Bitcoin whales while undermining the integrity of the global financial system. So the reply to that is that although holding Bitcoin might inadvertently benefit malicious actors, Bitcoin's use in illicit activities is statistically low. Yes, this is absolutely true, right? And what constitutes really as illicit activities, right? Also, if something is a rule, I'm not telling you to break rules, but I'm saying is for you to question them, right? Should you be taxed? Do taxes make sense? Ask yourself why they make sense. If you are always complaining about what the government is or isn't doing, right? Funding wars externally, sending money, and exporting inflation globally, not taking care of infrastructure, not taking care of the people in your home country, and etc. And if they already print the money, then that is already a form of taxation on you. So then what is the point of tax itself? Again, I'm not telling you not to pay tax, but I'm just telling you to question tax itself, right? As a professional provocateur, it is my duty to encourage people to think and think on their own. Who created these laws? Who are these laws supposed to be benefiting? And if it's not beneficial to you, then you should probably not only question it, but try a way or means to take action against that law that's not beneficial to you. Is just what I'm alluding to. So an SBR would transform the US government into a proprietary hedge fund, unduly risking public money and encouraging speculation. No, I think it's just part of the diversification within the portfolio. That's an exacerbation of but again, this is why this is objections, right? So another objection here states that an SBR would encourage more environmentally harmful mining and run counter to the US climate policy objectives. This whole climate change thing and climate policy stuff is really funny to me, because if you also look at what they're doing, trying to impose these things into Africa, which have literally they contribute very little to climate change, very little. The people who do are the people who have industrialized themselves, right? And I just find this stuff really fascinating, honestly. And when it comes to Bitcoin mining, it says it actually generates positive externalities for power grids and emissions, which is absolutely true. If managed correctly, the SBR aligns with the US climate policy objections or objectives by supporting a transition to renewable energy, which is obvious, right? Rather than undermining environmental goals, Bitcoin mining, when coupled with appropriate regulatory frameworks and technological innovation, could serve as a powerful tool for sustainable energy development, right? Right. So it's true that Bitcoin mining uses roughly about 0.55% of global electricity production capacity, but because mining activity is time flexible, location agnostic, and portable, scalable, and most of the all price sensitive, right? Most of all, it's all price sensitive, right? Miners use only the cheapest available energy, typically well below point or 5 cents per kilowatt, right? Consequently, Bitcoin mining has been driven to abundant renewable generation and is playing a grid stabilizing role on heavily renewable powered grids. As a buyer of the cheapest electricity, Bitcoin mining incentivizes power infrastructure without adding to peak loads when power is expensive, the easing thus easing the operations of greener grid, right? Et cetera and et cetera. So this is absolutely true. Another objection states that an SBR would prematurely pick one cryptocurrency as a winner. No, Bitcoin is the winner of the cryptocurrency market, right? Bitcoin is separate from crypto, as I've already stated. It's more like a digital gold asset, whereas the cryptocurrency market is like creating a new version of the stock market, right? Which Larry Fink now says, which is what things I was saying 2-3 years ago, and also put in my podcast like a year and a half, 2 years ago, that assets will be tokenized, right? It was obvious that assets in the stock market, the stock market would become the block market, or the stock exchange would become the block exchange. It was obvious that was where we were heading towards. So yeah, that debunks that. Another objection states that an SBR would require the US government to protect against market manipulation and potentially lose out to other nations or bad actors. So, if the US begins accumulating Bitcoin, it conceivably could be front run by other nations or large holders seeking to manipulate the market. However, the US would still benefit as asymmetrically from Bitcoin's price appreciation, even if other entities were aware of its intentions. So, because Bitcoin is transparent, decentralized nature means that its price is largely determined by the global market dynamics rather than the conduct of any single actor. Correct. Yeah, so that debunks that. Bitcoin is too volatile for a national reserve asset. That's another one of these objections. Bitcoin is volatile, but so are many reserve assets, including gold and even US Treasury bonds. When viewed over longer periods, the price of gold, for example, declined by over 80% from 1980 to 2000. Volatility alone does not disqualify an asset from being a valuable part of the National Reserve strategy. I think Bitcoin is only volatile when you're looking at it in the short term against the US dollar. But in the long term, it's always going to go up against the US dollar, right? Because it literally by design to be a checks and balance against the US dollar. So every time that they print money, then Bitcoin price will rise, right? So here are some conclusions and recommendations, right? So establishing SBR represents a forward-thinking approach to challenges and opportunities of the digital age. The time has come for the United States to consider Bitcoin not just as an asset, but as a pillar of the nation's strategic resilience. Right? Okay, so their recommendation is that policymakers develop a comprehensive legal and regulatory framework for an SBR, or Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. Implement a phased, transparent acquisition strategy to minimize market impact. 3. Establish robust security protocols and governance structures. 4. Integrate Bitcoin mining strategies with renewable energy initiatives. And 5. Conduct ongoing research to adapt the SBR strategy as the digital asset landscape evolves. Awesome article. Really enjoyed this and going over this with you guys. And yeah, I think that the times are changing a lot, right? This is what I would just conclude with. And you need to really get with the times, right? It's important to understand that we are in the stage where the technology itself actually bypasses the government, right? People won't say that out loud, you know, on huge platforms, but that is just the reality of the situation. I could build a technology now that's open source and anonymous and put it out to the general public, and if they like it enough and if it solves enough problems in, let's say, the decentralized financial space, then people will just use it, right? People will just provide liquidity, they'll trade the assets or whatever it is that I've put out, right? And there's nothing the government can do about that, right? About open source technology, they can't do anything about Linux is open source technology. So you need to understand that those who are the most adaptable in this era that we're in are the ones that are going to win. If you're not adaptable, if you're not moving like water with the times, you're going to be left behind, unfortunately. And that will be your reality. You'll be far left behind. It's also very important to hedge yourself, right? Diversify. Think of wealth building as offense and defense. This is kind of how I like to look at it, right? My offense is my businesses that I'm cash flowing in. My defense is what would I do if I'm how would I survive if I wasn't able to cash flow or generate money, or if a lot of shit went wrong, right, within my businesses. Well, I have land, right? I have access to clean drinking water from my own land, right? I can grow my own food. Soon I'm about to put up solar panels, right? So I can have my own electricity. So if shit hits the fan, I'm going to be just fine, right? And I'm also living in a tropical area. So that is my defense, right? And also it's a non-taxable land, right? So non-taxable real estate, right? So that is my defense. So you should be playing offense, right? Trying to cash flow as much as you can before the crash, but you want to be moving that into assets that pay you. But let's say, for instance, when shit hits the fan, you want to have that defensive uh, mechanisms and systems set up to where if shit hits the fan and my everything goes to zero, I still have the land that I live on with the house that I've already have that's completely paid for, right? Don't pay any tax in the area that I'm in. And again, I got access to water forever. And then solar, I have access to sun forever. So this is how you want to be looking at things. I'm not telling you not to also be engaging into digital assets, because I love digital assets. I'm heavy into digital assets. Actually, majority of my net worth is in digital assets, right? But then I also understand and comprehend that I need to hedge myself, because irrespective of what's happening with the robots, I'm also having land that I'm going to be farming on, right? So I'm going to be supplying people food, and people always need food, and that way I'm not irreplaceable, because humans always need food, right? And also I'm then also hedged with being at the precipice in the forefront of this digital age and this digital revolution, building an online school, teaching people about, you know, Web3 technology, and then soon artificial intelligence too, as well. As we have a course coming in on that. If you guys would like to get in on that, you can just look in our LinkTree, and you'll see our website helico.xyz, where we teach, you know, technological hard skills, and then we try to export you into the global market so that you can digitally, right, earn and work remotely. So I do hope you guys did enjoy this presentation and this two-part breakdown of the Bitcoin strategic reserve, and I hope it was provocative a little bit for you guys, and I hope you guys stay tuned for the next one, and peace.